It was a warm evening near the Norfolk naval base. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in orange and purple streaks. The salty breeze from the Atlantic carried the smell of sea and steel, the scent every sailor knew well. Inside a small bar called the Brass Anchor, the atmosphere buzzed with energy. It was the kind of place that came alive after sunset, where uniforms mixed with laughter, music, and stories from people who'd seen too much but still found ways to laugh about it. The bar was crowded with off-duty sailors, Marines, and pilots. Men and women trying to forget, just for a few hours, the pressure of their jobs. The jukebox in the corner played a country song about home and long nights at sea. Someone was cheering at the pool table. A group was singing along badly to the music, and the bartender kept sliding glasses down the counter with practiced speed. At one end of the bar sat Lieutenant Jake Mercer, a Navy SEAL who had just come back from a rough deployment overseas. He looked relaxed, but his eyes carried that quiet alertness soldiers never really lose. His short hair, tan skin, and the faint scar near his jaw made him look every bit the battle-hardened man he was. He took a slow sip of his beer and let out a sigh, half from relief, half from exhaustion. The past few months had been chaos, dust, heat, and endless missions that tested every nerve in his body. Tonight, he just wanted peace or something that felt close to it. Jake wasn't alone. A few of his teammates were sitting nearby, laughing, and trying to one-up each other with exaggerated stories of their last mission. It was a SEAL thing, a mix of humor and pride that helped them forget the darker parts of what they'd done. Then, the door opened, and a cool gust of wind swept through. A group of aviators walked in, flight jackets, patches, confident smiles. Pilots always carried that certain air, the mix of precision and swagger that came from dancing with danger at 30,000 feet. The group looked like they had just come off duty, relaxed but sharp. Among them was a woman, not much older than Jake, with dark hair tied neatly and eyes that seemed to scan the room in one quick, controlled motion. She didn't say much, just followed her team to a table near the bar. Her jacket had a faded patch on the sleeve, but the name was too worn out to read. She didn't look out of place, but there was something different about her. A kind of quiet confidence that didn't need attention to be felt. Jake noticed her immediately. It wasn't just that she was striking, it was her calm. Most people came into that bar loud, full of energy or laughter. She was calm, composed, like someone who had seen chaos and learned how to control it. His friend nudged him. "You checking out the pilot?" he joked. Jake smirked. "Just curious who she is. Never seen her before." The friend grinned. "Why don't you ask her?" Jake leaned back in his chair, pretending to think about it. He'd met plenty of pilots before. Some full of ego, some cool as ice. The call sign game was always funny to him. Pilots had these nicknames they treated like secret identities. SEALs didn't really do that. They had call signs too, sure, but nothing as dramatic as Viper or Ghost Hawk. Jake chuckled to himself and decided to tease a little. He stood up, walked over to the group of aviators, and leaned on the edge of their table. "Evening," he said casually. "Mind if I ask something?" The woman looked up, meeting his eyes without a trace of hesitation. "What's your call sign?" Jake asked with a half-smile, the tone light and teasing. Her team glanced at each other. A few grinned. They knew how sacred call signs were in the pilot world. You didn't just ask like that. But the woman didn't seem offended. Her face remained calm, her eyes steady. "Viper 1, she said simply. For a second, Jake thought she was joking. "Viper 1, he repeated, chuckling. "That sounds like something out of a video game." Her teammates laughed lightly, but she didn't. She just smiled, a small, polite, knowing smile. The kind that didn't need words to say, "You'll understand soon enough." Jake laughed again and shook his head. "Nice one, Viper 1. I like it." He walked back to his seat, still smiling, unaware that the name he had just laughed at carried more weight than he could imagine. At the aviator's table, one of her wingmen leaned toward her. "You're really not going to tell him, ma'am?" he whispered. She took a sip of her drink, eyes still on the bar counter. "No need," she said softly. "People always learn in their own time." Back at his seat, Jake's friend asked, So what's her call sign? Viper 1, Jake said with a laugh. Can you believe that? But deep down, something about the way she said it, calm, confident, almost cold, stuck in his head. He couldn't explain why, but for some reason, he felt like there was more behind that name than he had realized. The night carried on with music, laughter, and chatter, but Jake found himself glancing her way more than once. Each time, she seemed perfectly at ease. No showing off, no loud talking, just a quiet presence that drew attention without trying. He didn't know it yet, but that small moment, that joke about a call sign, was the beginning of a story he would never forget. Because before the night was over, Viper 1 would show him why some names carried the weight of legends. Jake sat back on his stool, still smiling about the exchange he had just had. He didn't mean any harm by his question, it was just his way of starting a conversation, a bit of harmless teasing between people in uniform. The Navy bar was full of that kind of talk. Soldiers, sailors, and pilots joked about ranks, missions, and nicknames all the time. But something about the woman's calm answer, Viper 1, stayed in his mind. He turned slightly, watching her group from a distance. The aviators were relaxed, talking quietly among themselves. The woman, Commander Elena Torres, though he didn't know her name yet, sat straight, her posture perfect but not stiff. She wasn't trying to draw attention. She didn't need to. The way her team listened to her said enough, they respected her deeply. Jake chuckled under his breath. Viper 1, he said again, shaking his head. Sounds like she picked it from a movie. His friend beside him laughed. Man, you can't take those call signs seriously. I met a pilot last year called Duck. Another one was Bingo. Half of them sound like comic book names. Jake nodded, but his curiosity grew. He had seen hundreds of pilots over the years, hotshots who talked big, bragged about their flight kills, their maneuvers, their missions. But this woman, she didn't seem like one of them. Her silence wasn't shyness. It was control. Still, the teasing side of Jake wasn't done. After another drink, he turned again toward her table and called out with a grin, Hey Viper 1, you fly jets or video game drones? The comment made a few people around the bar laugh. One of the aviators at her table looked like he was about to say something, but she lifted her hand slightly, a small gesture that told her team to let it go. Then she turned her head slowly toward Jake, eyes calm and expression unreadable. I fly both, she said simply. Her answer wasn't defensive or angry. It was steady, quiet, confident. The kind of reply that made the laughter die down quickly. For a second, Jake didn't know what to say. He expected a comeback or maybe a laugh, but her cool tone caught him off guard. Oh yeah, he said, trying to sound playful again. So what's your ride, Viper 1? F-18? Or one of those fancy stealth toys? She looked at him for a moment, then turned back to her drink, her voice calm as she replied, The kind that keeps your team alive. The bar went silent. Jake blinked. Her answer wasn't loud, but it carried weight. A few people near them exchanged glances. They could tell that meant something deeper. Jake raised his eyebrows, a small grin still on his face, but the humor had faded a little. Fair enough, he said finally, lifting his glass. To Viper 1. She gave a faint smile and nodded politely but didn't raise her glass back. Her team continued their quiet conversation, and Jake turned away again, feeling something he couldn't quite explain. A strange mix of curiosity and respect. His friend leaned closer and whispered, You might want to quit while you're ahead, man. I think she's the real deal. Jake laughed. Come on, I was just joking. Lighten up. But deep down, his teammate was right. There was something about her presence that didn't fit the usual pilot stereotype. No arrogance, no loud confidence, just calm authority. It was the kind of composure you only saw in people who'd been through real danger and come out stronger. A few minutes passed, and Jake went back to chatting with his team, though his mind kept wandering. The sound of laughter and music filled the air again, but he caught himself glancing in her direction more than once. Each time, she seemed perfectly relaxed. Her expression thoughtful, her eyes calm, her voice low as she spoke to her team. Then, something unexpected happened. A young pilot from her group, probably new, judging by his clean jacket, looked toward Jake and said, "You know, sir, maybe don't joke about call signs too much. That one's earned." Jake frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" The young man looked like he was about to answer, but the woman, Viper One, gave him a small look and he stopped mid-sentence. She turned her eyes toward Jake again, her tone still polite but now with a hint of firmness. "Some things sound like jokes until you've lived them, Lieutenant." Jake froze a little. She knew his rank. He hadn't said it, but she somehow knew. That detail made him blink. "You know me?" he asked, curious. "Everyone knows someone," she replied quietly, then turned back to her group. Her words made no sense to him at the moment, but they stuck in his head like a faint echo. Jake sat in silence for a while after that, trying to figure her out. The name Viper One no longer sounded funny to him. It sounded earned. He thought about all the missions he'd been on, all the times his team depended on air support to survive. Somewhere up there in the night sky there was always someone. A pilot with a call sign watching from above, guiding them home. Maybe this woman was one of those unseen guardians. The rest of the night carried on, but the mood had shifted. Jake still laughed with his friends, but he wasn't really in it. Every now and then, his eyes would drift back to the woman with the quiet eyes and calm voice, Viper One. He didn't know it yet, but the truth behind her name would soon come out, and when it did, he would never look at her or any pilot the same way again. For a few seconds after she spoke, the bar felt completely still. The music from the jukebox was still playing, glasses were still clinking, but for Jake, everything seemed quieter. The woman's calm words echoed in his head. The kind that keeps your team alive. He didn't know how to respond, and for a man like Jake Mercer, a Navy SEAL used to tense situations and quick comebacks, that was rare. Something about the way she said it wasn't meant as a boast or a warning. It was just truth, simple and sharp. Then one of the younger pilots at her table leaned forward and said, almost carefully, "Lieutenant Mercer, right?" Jake looked at him, surprised. "Yeah, that's me." The young man nodded toward the woman beside him. "You should probably know who you're talking to." Jake frowned, a little defensive now. "Oh yeah? And who exactly am I talking to?" The pilot looked toward her again, almost like he was asking permission. The woman, still quiet, still composed, gave a small nod. The young man turned back to Jake. "That's Commander Elena Torres, sir. Call sign Viper One. Fleet Air Arm." Jake blinked. The name sounded familiar, but it didn't click right away. Then it did. His smile faded slowly as his brain made the connection. Elena Torres. He had heard that name before, not in bars or casual talk, but in the kind of briefings that made your pulse slow down. She was the one pilots talked about in low voices. The one who led precision airstrikes under impossible weather. The one who flew missions that never made it into reports. Viper One wasn't just a catchy nickname, it was a legend. Jake looked at her again, this time with different eyes. She didn't look like a legend. She didn't act like one either. She was just sitting there, quiet, sipping her drink like anyone else. But that calm, that steady silence now made perfect sense. People like her didn't need to prove anything. "Wait," Jake said slowly, trying to piece it together. "You're the Commander Torres? The one who ran the Red Desert Strike in 2019. The young pilot smiled faintly. "Among others, sir." Jake leaned back in his chair, feeling both embarrassed and impressed. The bar, which had been buzzing with noise just moments before, seemed to listen in. A few sailors nearby had also picked up on the name, Commander Torres. Even among the Navy, she was famous. Someone at the counter whispered, "That's Viper One? Damn." Jake rubbed the back of his neck and chuckled awkwardly. "Well," he said, trying to recover. "Guess I should have done my homework before running my mouth." Her eyes met his again, but there was no anger in them, just quiet amusement. "It's fine," she said gently. "You weren't the first." The way she said it, calm, almost kind, made Jake feel even smaller. It wasn't pity, though. It was understanding. She'd probably seen 100 men like him. Strong, confident, teasing, until they realized who they were talking to. He wanted to say something clever, something that could make the moment less awkward, but his mind was blank. Instead, he gave a small laugh. You know, I've heard of you, he admitted. Didn't realize I'd be sitting in the same bar as you. Torres tilted her head slightly, the corner of her mouth curving into a faint smile. Bars are great equalizers, she said. Nobody cares about ranks here, until someone starts asking about call signs. That made a few people laugh, including Jake. The tension in the air lightened a bit, but the respect stayed. Still, Jake couldn't shake the memory of that name, Viper 1. It wasn't just another call sign to him anymore. He remembered a night, years ago, in the middle of a mission gone wrong. The comms were chaotic, gunfire everywhere. His team pinned down in the dark Afghan mountains. They'd been desperate for air support that night. The only thing he remembered clearly from the radio chatter was a voice. Calm, controlled, cutting through the panic. Viper 1 inbound. Hold position. I've got you. At the time, he thought it was just another pilot. But now, sitting in this bar, he realized it might have been her. He looked at her again, studying her face under the soft bar lights. She didn't look like someone who'd flown through fire and chaos. But maybe that was the point. Real warriors didn't always look the part. Viper 1, he said quietly, repeating it to himself, this time with respect. She noticed. You say it differently now, she remarked. Jake smiled, a little embarrassed. Yeah, guess it sounds heavier once you know the story behind it. Torres nodded, finishing her drink. Every name has a story, she said. Some just aren't told very often. The bar slowly returned to life. Laughter, music, the sound of pool balls cracking against each other. But the air between Jake and Torres stayed charged with a quiet understanding. Jake's teammate leaned closer and whispered, You really had no idea who she was, did you? Not a clue, Jake admitted, shaking his head. I thought she was just another pilot. His friend grinned. Man, only you could tease a legend and live to tell the tale. Jake laughed softly, but deep down he felt humbled. He'd seen plenty of brave men and women in his time, but there was something different about her. She didn't brag, didn't correct, didn't need to prove herself. Her silence said everything. As the night went on, Jake found himself replaying their brief exchange again and again. The casual question that started as a joke had turned into a reminder that behind every name, behind every patch and call sign, there was a story of courage he might never fully understand. He didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. He was about to find out exactly why Viper 1 was more than just a name. It was a legend written in the skies, and one that had once saved his life without him even realizing it. Jake sat there, still trying to take in what he'd just learned. The woman he had been teasing a few minutes ago wasn't just another pilot passing through Norfolk. She was Commander Elena Torres, Viper 1, the kind of pilot whose name traveled quietly through Navy halls and briefing rooms, spoken with a mix of respect and awe. He had heard stories about her, the kind that didn't always make it to official reports. Stories of impossible missions, tight extractions, and perfect air support under heavy enemy fire. But Jake had never connected those stories with the calm, quiet woman sitting a few tables away from him, sipping her drink like any other off-duty officer. He felt a mix of embarrassment and curiosity twisting inside him. He wanted to say something, maybe apologize, maybe just understand who she really was. So he took a deep breath, stood up, and walked back to her table. Commander Torres, right? He said, trying to sound respectful this time. She looked up, her expression calm as ever. That's correct. I think I owe you a proper introduction, he said, straightening his shoulders a little. Lieutenant Jake Mercer, SEAL Team 7. Her eyes flickered for just a second. SEAL Team 7? She repeated softly. Kandahar? 2014? Jake froze. The bar noises faded again. Yeah, he said slowly. How do you know that? Torres set her glass down carefully, her gaze steady but not cold. I was there, she said. Not on the ground above it. I flew the air cover that night. Jake blinked, his heart thudding a little faster. Wait, that was you? You were Viper 1. She nodded once. Your team was pinned in that valley. Enemy fire on both ridges. You called for air support, but comms were broken for almost 5 minutes. We almost lost contact with you completely. Jake's throat went dry. He remembered that night vividly. The chaos, the shouting, the smoke, the desperate calls for help over the radio that kept cutting out. His team had been trapped with no clear exit. Then, out of nowhere, a single F/A-18 had come roaring through the night sky, dropping precise strikes on the enemy positions, clearing the ridge long enough for them to reach the extraction point. He remembered one radio transmission, brief but clear, a female voice cutting through the static. Viper 1 inbound. Hold your position. You're not dying tonight. He had never forgotten that voice, but he had never known the face behind it, until now. Jake stared at her, speechless. I can't believe this, he said finally. You're the one who saved us. Torres smiled faintly, a calm, almost shy smile. I didn't save anyone, she said softly. You saved yourselves. We just cleared the way. Jake shook his head. No, Commander. You don't understand. We were done. We were out of ammo, out of time. When you came in, we thought it was over. You gave us a chance to get out alive. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The people around them had gone quiet again, listening but pretending not to. There was something powerful in the way Jake's voice trembled slightly. Not from weakness, but from gratitude. Torres finally said, I remember that mission. The ridge was close to friendly units, so the margin for error was small. She gave a slight pause. You had wounded with you, didn't you? Jake nodded slowly. 2 men. One didn't make it. The other. He's back home now, has a family. She gave a small nod of respect. Good. That's the best outcome we can hope for. Jake looked down at the floor for a moment, then back up at her. You know, I tried to find out who was flying that night. We never got a name. Command just said it was classified. Torres shrugged lightly. Sometimes it's better that way. What matters is that everyone who could come home did. He smiled quietly, still amazed. And here I was, joking about your call sign. Her eyes softened. It's fine, Lieutenant. Most people don't think twice about it. But that name, she paused. It came from that night. The one you just mentioned. Jake frowned slightly. What do you mean? She hesitated for a moment before explaining. We took heavy fire during that mission. One missile locked onto my jet mid-run. I should have been gone. But somehow the system broke the lock at the last second. My wingman said it looked like the jet dodged like a Viper. Fast, sudden, impossible. After that, the name stuck. Jake smiled in disbelief. You earned it. Torres looked at him with that same calm expression. We all earn our scars differently, Lieutenant. The words hit him harder than he expected. He could see it now, the strength behind her quietness, the weight behind that small smile. She wasn't just a good pilot. She was one of those rare people who carried their past without showing it, who had seen death and didn't let it change their humanity. After a pause, Jake said quietly, Can I buy you a drink? I think I owe you 1 or 100. She smiled again, small, almost shy this time. You don't owe me anything. Just promise me one thing. What's that? Next time someone tells you their call sign, she said, her tone gentle but firm, don't laugh. Every name has a story, and sometimes it's written in fire. Jake nodded slowly. Fair deal. He stood there for a moment longer, unsure of what else to say. Then he saluted her, not as a show, but as a quiet gesture of respect. She returned it with a calm nod. As he walked back to his table, he could still feel the weight of her words. His teammates looked at him curiously. What happened, man? One of them asked. Jake took his seat, still stunned. That pilot, he said softly. She's not just Viper 1. She's the reason we made it back from Kandahar. His friends went silent. No jokes, no laughter, just quiet respect. At the other table, Elena Torres glanced his way once more, then turned back to her drink. She didn't need thanks or recognition. She'd heard enough stories like this before. Lives saved, missions completed, names never known. But tonight, for the first time, one of those soldiers knew who she was. And for Jake, that changed everything. Jake sat there in silence, his mind replaying everything Commander Torres had just said. The sounds of the bar faded away. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, even the faint music from the jukebox. All of it became distant noise as his thoughts drifted back to that one night he could never forget. The night Viper 1 had changed everything. It was 2014, deep in the mountains of Kandahar. The mission had gone wrong from the start. Jake and his SEAL team were supposed to extract a high-value target and get out before sunrise. What was meant to be a clean operation turned into chaos when their cover was blown. The night was pitch black, the kind of darkness where you couldn't tell sky from ground. The wind howled, carrying sand that cut against their faces like tiny blades. The air smelled of dust and gunpowder. They had taken heavy fire from all sides, bullets snapping past them, explosions lighting up the ridge like flashes of lightning. Jake remembered shouting over the comms, trying to reach command. "Eagle Base, this is Bravo Team. We're pinned down. We need air support." But the radio was filled with static. The enemy had jammed their signal. His teammate, Collins, was hit in the shoulder but kept firing. "We're not getting out of here alive, are we?" he had yelled, half laughing, half scared. Jake didn't answer. He couldn't promise a lie. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw a streak of light in the sky. A missile, cutting through the dark, aimed straight for them. It hit the ground just short of their position, throwing sand and debris everywhere. The blast knocked Jake backward, his ears ringing, his chest pounding. They were trapped. No way forward. No way back. The extraction chopper couldn't land until the ridges were clear, and enemy snipers were already closing in. Jake had crouched behind a half-broken wall, trying to fix the radio, his hands shaking. Come on, he muttered, twisting the dials. Static, then silence. And then a voice. It was faint at first, barely cutting through the static. But then it came again, steady, calm, and firm. "This is Viper 1. Hold your position." Jake froze, his heart jumping. Say again, say again." The voice came back, clearer this time. "This is Viper 1. I've got you on visual. Weapons hot. Brace for cover." And then it began. Out of the dark sky, the sound of a jet roared through the mountains, sharp, powerful, and terrifying in the best way. The ground shook as the first missiles hit the ridge above them, perfectly timed. Fire and dirt exploded upward as enemy positions vanished in seconds. "Holy hell!" Collins shouted, his face lighting up from the flames. "We've got angels overhead." Jake could barely believe it. Whoever that pilot was, she wasn't just good, she was surgical. Every hit landed exactly where it needed to. He watched as tracer fire from the enemy side lit up the sky, trying to hit the jet. But Viper 1 moved like lightning. Fast, unpredictable, almost impossible to track. One missile came dangerously close. Jake saw it streak toward the jet, his stomach dropping. But at the last second, the F/A-18 tilted sharply, spinning out of its path. The missile exploded harmlessly in the distance. Jake remembered the sound that came next, her voice, cutting through the chaos once more. "Ridge cleared. Extraction path open. Move now." Those words were like a lifeline. He shouted into the radio. "Copy that. Moving." The team pushed forward, dragging their wounded with them. Every step felt heavier, every second longer. The sound of the jet roaring overhead gave them courage. It meant they weren't alone. When they finally reached the clearing, the extraction chopper was waiting. The wind from its rotors whipped against their faces as they climbed aboard. Jake turned back one last time. Through the dust and smoke, he saw a faint flash in the distance, a signal flare from the jet above. "Viper 1 returning to base," the voice said through the comms, calm and collected, as if she hadn't just flown through hell. Jake never forgot that voice. He had wondered for years who she was, the mystery pilot who saved them when everything seemed lost. Command later told them the mission was classified, and that was the end of it. He never got a name, never got a chance to say thank you. But now, sitting in this bar years later, he finally knew. The woman he had laughed at, the the one he thought was just another pilot, had been the guardian angel who saved his team that night. He looked across the table at her, the dim light reflecting in her calm eyes. She wasn't boasting, wasn't even smiling. She sat there quietly, as if that night was just another day at work for her. Jake felt something shift inside him, a deep respect that went beyond words. He remembered how, during training, SEALs always said that air support was the thin line between life and death. But until that night, he never truly understood what that meant. Now he did. He leaned forward slightly and said, "You know, I always wondered what kind of person flies into fire like that." Torres gave a faint shrug. "Someone who doesn't like leaving people behind." Her words were simple, but they hit deep. She wasn't talking like a hero. She was just speaking truth, the kind that comes from experience, from loss, from doing the job because no one else can. Jake nodded slowly. "You saved 6 lives that night, Commander." She looked at him for a long second before replying quietly, "6 lives that were worth saving." Jake smiled faintly. "You really are something else, Viper One." She tilted her head slightly, the smallest hint of humor in her voice. "Now you say it with respect." He laughed softly, and for the first time that night so did she. But deep down, Jake knew he'd never forget that voice, that call sign, or that night. Because Viper One wasn't just a name anymore. It was the sound of courage echoing through the dark sky, the voice that had once promised, "You're not dying tonight." The bar felt different now. It wasn't just a place filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and background music anymore. It had turned into something quieter, something heavier, as if everyone there could feel that a story had just been told without words. Jake sat there across from Commander Elena Torres, Viper One, still trying to take it all in. He had met hundreds of soldiers, officers, and pilots over the years, but none had ever made him feel this way. She was calm, humble, and powerful all at once. She didn't brag about her missions or demand respect. She simply had it. The realization that she had once been the voice that saved him and his team still made his chest tighten. The laughter he had shared earlier about her call sign now felt distant, almost foolish. He couldn't believe he had joked about something that carried so much meaning. Torres seemed to sense what he was feeling. She gave him a small, kind smile, not mocking, not cold, just understanding. "You don't have to look so guilty, Lieutenant," she said softly. "You didn't know." Jake nodded slowly. "Still," he said, "I feel like an idiot. I joked about something that meant life or death once." Torres shook her head. "Don't worry about it. Everyone makes assumptions. You're not the first." Her voice was calm and even, but there was something behind it, a quiet weight, the kind of tone that only comes from someone who has seen things they can't forget. Jake leaned forward slightly. "You've seen a lot, haven't you?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked down at her glass, turning it slowly in her hands. "Enough," she said after a moment. "Enough to know that respect isn't earned by talking about what we've done. It's earned by doing it." That simple line hit Jake harder than he expected. He'd heard a lot of speeches in his career, from officers, commanders, even politicians, but none of them sounded like this. Hers was quiet, real, and honest. The two of them sat there for a moment in comfortable silence. Around them, the bar slowly began to buzz again. People started laughing. Someone played another song on the jukebox, and the bartender began serving a new round of drinks. But the mood at their table stayed calm, steady, like the eye of a storm. Jake raised his glass slightly. "To the ones who do it," he said. Torres smiled faintly and lifted her own. "To the ones who make it back." They clinked their glasses together, and for a second the world felt still. After a quiet sip, Jake spoke again. "You know," he said, "we never really think about what it's like for the people in the air. For us on the ground, it's just noise and explosions. We don't see your faces. We just hear a voice over the radio and hope it's friendly." Torres nodded. "And for us, it's the opposite. We don't see your faces either, just heat signatures and coordinates. We watch dots moving on a screen and know that each one is a life we might lose if we're too slow." Jake's throat tightened at that. "That sounds heavy." "It is," she said quietly. But that's the job. You don't think about fear. You think about precision. You think about the people counting on you. And when it's over, you move on. He studied her face. The calm expression, the steady eyes, the faint tiredness that she tried to hide. And what happens when you can't move on? He asked softly. She gave a small, distant smile. Then you come to a place like this, she said, glancing around the bar. And you remind yourself that life goes on. Jake smiled faintly too. Guess that's what we're both doing here tonight. Maybe, she said. But some of us are better at hiding it. They both laughed quietly. It wasn't the loud, cheerful laughter from before. It was softer, real. The kind that comes from understanding, from sharing something unspoken. After a moment, Jake set his glass down and stood up. I really do owe you a drink, Commander. Not for tonight, for that night. Torres looked up at him, amused. I thought I told you, you don't owe me anything. He smiled. Maybe not, but I'm still offering. She thought about it for a second, then nodded. All right then, one drink. But after that, we're even. He signaled the bartender and ordered 2 drinks, whiskey for him, soda for her. When the glasses arrived, they raised them again. To the ones who don't get named, Torres said quietly. Jake nodded, understanding instantly. And to the ones who never stop showing up. They drank, and this time, there was no tension, no awkwardness, just mutual respect. For the next few minutes they talked, not about missions or medals but about small, ordinary things. Favorite places, songs that reminded them of home, the food they missed from deployment. It was strange how normal it felt. 2 soldiers from completely different worlds, sitting in a bar, sharing stories like old friends. Jake realized something then. True heroes never tried to sound like heroes. They didn't boast, didn't demand recognition. They carried their stories quietly, letting their actions speak. And Torres was exactly that kind of person. When she finally finished her drink, she stood up and adjusted her jacket. Well, Lieutenant, she said with a small smile. It's been a long day. Time for me to disappear again. Jake stood too. Before you do, thank you. For that night and for this one. Torres nodded, her smile warm but distant. Take care of your team, Mercer. You never know when you'll need a voice over the radio again. She turned and walked toward the door, her boots tapping softly against the wooden floor. As she stepped outside into the cool night, a gust of wind blew in behind her. Jake watched her go, standing there quietly. She didn't look back, but she didn't need to. The respect had already been exchanged, silently, completely. As the door closed, Jake sat back down and stared at his drink. For a long moment he just sat there, thinking. Then he smiled to himself and whispered under his breath. To Viper One. The bar carried on around him. Laughter, stories, music. But for Jake, the night had changed something. He'd come in looking for rest, maybe a laugh. Instead, he'd found a reminder that real strength isn't loud. Sometimes, it sits quietly in a corner, wearing a flight jacket and a calm smile, carrying 1,000 untold stories behind one name, Viper One. The night outside the bar was cool and quiet, the kind of silence that made every sound seem sharper. The hum of streetlights, the distant roll of the tide from the harbor, the low thrum of a Navy ship far out in the water. Jake stepped out a few minutes after Torres had left. He wasn't sure why. Maybe he thought he'd catch another glimpse of her, or maybe he just needed air. But she was gone. Only the faint echo of her boots on the wet pavement lingered in his mind. For a long moment, he stood there staring into the dark, hands in his pockets, replaying everything that had happened that night. He smiled faintly. Viper One, he whispered to himself. The name sounded different now. Not a joke, not a mystery, but a legend. As he walked toward the base gates, the world around him felt heavier yet somehow brighter. Every memory of the battlefield came rushing back. The fear, the noise, the weight of command. But now, there was something new mixed into those memories. Gratitude. He remembered that moment back in Kandahar when the sky had lit up, when hope had felt lost, and suddenly a voice had cut through the static. This is Viper One. Hold your position. That calm voice had been her. the woman who had just shared a drink with him as if it were nothing. He stopped walking for a second and laughed softly, shaking his head. "You never really know who you're sitting next to," he muttered. Back at the base, the night watch was quiet. A few guards stood near the gates, chatting softly. Jake nodded at them as he passed. He wasn't tired yet, not really. His body felt awake, alive in a strange way, like he just rediscovered something important he didn't know he'd lost. He went to the docks, where the sea breeze was cool against his face. The reflection of the ship's lights danced on the water, glittering like moving stars. He sat down on one of the benches and leaned back, looking up at the night sky. Somewhere up there, he imagined, jets like Torres's were flying, silent, invisible, keeping the world safe while no one noticed. It made him think about all the people he'd served with, the ones who never got credit, the ones who came home changed, and the ones who didn't come home at all. War had a strange way of connecting people, even those who never met. The man on the ground, the pilot in the air. Their lives could depend on each other, even if they never spoke or saw each other's faces. That night in Kandahar had proved that. As the wind brushed through his hair, Jake pulled out his phone and opened a photo of his old team. 6 men, smiling in dusty uniforms, tired but alive. Collins had his arm slung around Jake's shoulder, his grin wide and reckless as always. Jake stared at the photo for a long moment. "Guess I finally found her, Collins," he said softly. "The one who saved our asses that night." He could almost hear Collins laugh in his head, that rough, teasing voice saying, "Took you long enough, man." Jake smiled, the corners of his eyes tightening with emotion. "Yeah," he whispered. "Took me long enough." He sat there for a while, watching the stars and listening to the waves. He didn't realize how much time had passed until his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from an unknown number. He frowned, opened it, and froze. "Keep your eyes open, Lieutenant. The skies are never as quiet as they look. V1 inch." Jake stared at the screen, his heart skipping a beat. A small smile tugged at his lips. She hadn't just disappeared into the night. She'd left her mark, one last message that felt like both a warning and a promise. He typed a reply but stopped midway. What could he even say? Thank you felt too small, goodbye felt wrong. So instead, he just sent one short line. "Understood, Commander. Clear skies." He slipped the phone back into his pocket and leaned back again, feeling an unexpected sense of peace. Maybe this was closure, not the kind that comes from words but from understanding. He realized that real heroes didn't need applause or attention. They just did their job and disappeared into the shadows, leaving only stories behind. A few minutes later, the sound of jets echoed faintly overhead. Jake looked up, catching sight of a small light moving fast across the sky. Could have been anyone, any pilot, any plane. But deep down, he knew. He smiled. "Fly safe, Viper 1, he murmured. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of salt and fuel. He sat there until dawn began to rise, painting the water gold. The world around him started to wake up. Sailors heading to duty, the sound of engines warming, the routine rhythm of Navy life returning. But Jake felt different, lighter, grounded, inspired. As he stood and turned back toward the base, he realized something important. It wasn't just about surviving missions or following orders. It was about the people who stood behind those victories. The unseen, the unheard, the ones who made survival possible. That night, he'd met one of them. And now, every time he'd hear the sound of a jet in the distance, he'd remember her. The calm voice that once broke through chaos. The pilot who never asked for recognition. The legend called Viper 1. By the time he reached his quarters, the sun had fully risen. The sky was clear, a pale blue streaked with gold. He looked out the window one last time before going inside. Somewhere out there, she was flying again, guarding the skies, protecting people she'd never meet. Jake smiled softly. "See you up there someday," he said quietly. Then he turned away and closed the door, carrying with him not just a story, but a sense of respect that would never fade. For the woman who'd turned a call sign into a symbol of courage, and a simple night at a bar into something unforgettable. A few months had passed since that night at the Norfolk base bar, but Jake still thought about her, about Viper 1. Some nights, when he couldn't sleep, he'd hear the faint sound of jets flying overhead and find himself looking up at the dark sky, wondering if she was up there again, flying through the stars like she always did, silent, fearless, untouchable. He had gone back to his usual life on base. Training sessions, briefings, missions, everything felt the same, yet somehow different. There was a new sense of perspective inside him. Every time he looked at the sky, he remembered that someone out there was watching over them. Someone who didn't need recognition or praise. Someone who just did what had to be done. One afternoon, Jake was sitting in his office, going over mission reports, when a knock came on the door. He looked up. A young airman stepped inside, holding an envelope. "Message for you, sir," the airman said. Jake took it, thanked him, and waited until he left before opening it. Inside was a short letter. No insignia, no signature, just a few simple lines typed on plain paper. "To those who serve quietly, thank you for remembering those who fly unseen. V1 inch." Jake smiled as he read it. It was her again. No rank, no titles, just V1. The same quiet presence, the same simplicity. She had a way of saying a lot with very few words. He folded the letter carefully and placed it inside his journal, the same one he kept his mission notes and old photos in. Then he sat back, thinking about how strange life could be. One simple night in a bar had changed the way he saw everything. A few days later, Jake got word that his team was being reassigned. A new mission overseas. He gathered his men and briefed them as usual, but this time, he made sure to say something extra before they left. He looked around the room, meeting each of their eyes. "Listen," he said, "when we're out there, and it feels like no one's got our back, remember this. Someone always does. You might not see them, you might not even know their name, but they're there. Watching. Protecting. Trust that." His men nodded. They didn't ask where the words came from, but they could tell it meant something personal. When the mission began, things went smoother than expected. But in the middle of it, as they were moving through a rocky valley, the sound of jet engines thundered above. Jake looked up instinctively. 2F divided by a -18s sliced through the clouds, circling high overhead. He couldn't see the pilot's face, of course, but something in him just knew. He smiled. "She's up there," he murmured. The other SEAL beside him, confused, asked, "Who?" Jake just shook his head, still watching the sky. "An old friend." The mission ended successfully. They made it back to base without a single loss. That night, while everyone celebrated, Jake stepped outside alone. The stars were bright, and the air was crisp. He could hear faint laughter behind him, the sound of victory and relief. But his attention was on the horizon. Then he heard it, the low, distant roar of a jet passing overhead. He followed it with his eyes until it disappeared beyond the clouds. "Clear skies, Viper 1, he said softly. It was strange how people could come into your life for just one night and still leave a mark that never fades. She hadn't just saved his life. She had reminded him of something deeper. That courage wasn't about being loud or being seen. It was about doing your duty even when no one was watching. Weeks later, Jake received a news report about a classified air operation that had gone right. A mission that had saved an entire convoy from an ambush in the desert. The article didn't give names or details, but one line caught his attention. Led by an unnamed female pilot known only by her call sign, V1. He stared at the screen for a long moment, smiling quietly to himself. She was still out there doing what she did best. No fame, no spotlight, just quiet bravery. He closed the laptop and leaned back in his chair. "You never stop, do you?" he whispered with a smile. Months turned into a year. Jake's career kept moving forward. He was promoted, took on more responsibilities, and even began mentoring younger recruits. And every time he trained them, he'd tell them a story, not using her real name, of course, but always mentioning Viper 1. "She was the best pilot I ever met," he'd tell them. Didn't talk much, didn't brag. But when she was up there, you could feel it. That kind of calm that only comes from someone who's not afraid. His students listened closely every time, the story becoming a quiet legend around the base. One evening, long after his class had left, Jake walked alone along the runway. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. A few jets stood ready at the far end, their metal skins glowing in the warm light. As he walked, a familiar sound filled the air, the deep rumble of a jet taking off. He stopped and watched as it rose into the sky, leaving behind a thin trail across the fading sunlight. He couldn't see the pilot's face, but deep down he didn't need to. He smiled and gave a small salute toward the sky. "Keep flying, Viper 1, he said quietly. "You're still making us all proud." The jet disappeared into the clouds, leaving nothing but silence and the faint smell of jet fuel. Jake stood there for a long time, watching the horizon until the stars began to appear one by one. Somewhere out there, he knew she was still flying, the woman who had once been just a call sign, but had become something far greater. A reminder that true heroes don't always wear medals or stand on stages. Sometimes, they walk quietly among us, calm, humble, and strong. And as the night sky darkened, Jake whispered one last time, almost like a prayer, to Viper 1, the voice that never stopped answering when the world needed her most. The wind carried his words into the night, fading softly into the sound of the distant waves, as if the sky itself was listening.